Hi. Shangita.
A very good evening to all of you present today in the 8th session of the Indian Poetry Past and Present, which has been organized by the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library for the past few months. Today, this session is our first program in the new year, and we have with us Sri Robin S. Nagangam, an eminent Indian poet today. And as moderator, we have with us our very beloved Bashubidi, Professor Bashubi Fraser. We are very happy to have you both this evening. We would now request our secretary, Nishi Pulogotha, to kindly welcome the audience who is virtually present with us in this meeting and also across the globe through the Facebook Live. Nishidi.
Hello, good evening, and a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined in for this session on Indian poetry, past, present, and future, organized by the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library. There are people who have joined in with us on Zoom, and also we are live on Facebook. So we do have an audience there as well. Uh, the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library has, since the pandemic begun, we have gone online for all of programs. And one of the advantages of the online platform, of course, is the fact that we're able to get our members from all across the globe. We're also able to get guests, our poets, who are located in various parts of the world. We do miss our library space at the ICCR and our interactions, but then we are definitely making the best of the times that we are in. We have regular programs, not just programs where we have eminent poets talking to us about their art, reading their poetry, but we've also been having poetry readings organized by our members, where our members read poems on this virtual platform. We have been trying to connect using poetry. Another way we have been doing that is we have these WhatsApp poetry prompt events every Sunday, where our members contribute, write their poems and share with us, because we think that is one way in which we could stay connected throughout the pandemic. And I must tell you that we've had quite a good output, quite a good collection of these poems, which we are now working to, some of which we are now working to collect into an anthology. We are looking forward we've been discussing, we've been having various poets, Indian poets writing in English. And this evening we have with us Robin S. Nangogam from Nehu, who joins us this evening. And we are looking forward to hearing from Robin about his art, about various aspects of his art, the influences, and we are looking forward definitely to hearing his poems. We are very grateful this evening to have Professor Bashubi Fraser, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Bashubi once again for the CBE, which she has recently been awarded. Bashobidi is the founder of the Intercultural Poetry and Performance Library and our chief ideator. And because of this because of our programs being all held online, Bashobidi has been joining all our programs. And this evening, she is the moderator of this session. And we look forward to a wonderful evening of poetry. Welcome once again to the IPPL. We hope that this association with IPPL for Robin continues even after this program. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nisi.
Thank you, Nishidi. Without much ado, I will now request Joydip Shorongi Joydipda to kindly, uh, open this session with a short introduction to the program and also introducing our guest poet today.
Uh, Very good evening to all. I know the time zone is different for Bhashaviti. It's not evening; it's afternoon. So I hope Bhashaviti had already lunch or maybe preparing. Just she will go lunch after the program. All global guests, our honorable guest poet of the evening, Robin S. Angam, and all members of IPPL, everybody involved in the advisory board of IPPL, is a hearty new year. Congratulations. We are possibly 2020 is over, and we are looking forward to a bright, prosperous new year 2021. But nothing could stop the flow of the hearts for IPPL. IPPL is committed to bring poetry at the heart of the nation. Bring poetry at the heart of the nation is a phrase of our chief ideator, Professor Bashavi Fraser. This evening, we are missing our honorable president for her urgent engagement, Professor Shamijukta Das Gupta, the convener, uh, English Board, Sahitya Academy, New Delhi, and of course, the Professor Agalonian University, Poland, a noted poet. IPPL Advisory Board is unique, of course, involving Professor Shankho Ghosh, Nanaduddin Shankho Ghosh, as the president of IPPL Advisory Board, involving Keki Daruwala and Bama, Keshav Chidanandan, Professor Malash Rilal, and all leading academic as well as poets and writers from different parts of the globe. IPPL is actually based on the ideas of Scottish Poetry Library. And it has come along so smoothly, and it's a body, a very active body of, I will say, the service providers for the field of poetry and performance from Kolkata and beyond. Why I say it beyond? Because we have the members from Canada, we have members from Scotland, and we have members from beyond the territory of India as as an identity landmark. We have had with us in this particular series of lectures Keki Daruwala, Mamang Dai, K. Sachidanandan, and many great poets who addressed us, enlightened us, and it helped more research interests and generated more research interest on Indian poetry in English and also translation of Indian poetry in English in the global platform. Thank you for a very smart team which is going towards the right directions for the cause of poetry. Today we have with us the voice of Northeast, Onipuri born Rabines Angam, who started his poetic career with the publication of his volume of verse, Words and the Silence, in 1988. And his other important collections include Time's Crossroads, The Desire of Roots, and there is a very famous essay which I read possibly a couple of times, or maybe three, four times. Poetry in a Time of Terror appeared in other side of journal Xi'an University of Architecture and Technology, Volume 12, Issue 5, 2020. It's a wonderful, and he is a professor of English in the Northeast Hill University, and he has been writing for 30 years and more. And he is an important voice of Indian writing in English these days. And Rabin is known for his prestigious Scott Award also for translation that he owned, and also a very prominent voice in the Northeast. And I remember once Jayanta Mahapatra told me 20 years ago that I think Rabin is one of the major voices of India and possibly the voice from the Northeast. and he used to contribute a lot of articles and poems for Chandrabhaga. And Chandrabhaga was, of course, known for Jayanta Mahapatra's uh, journal, and a very loved person and very interesting to communicate with Rabin. And I remember visiting his university long back, and where the interaction was so fruitful. And he always he always engaged people in poetic discussions. I'll just quote a couple of three, four lines of Rabin's one very important poem, and then I will hand you over to Shangita to introduce our moderator of this session, Professor Bashwi Fraser. I quote from My Invented Land, Rabin S. Anga. My native place has not been cherished so yet. My homeland, a traveler without end, a palate that will always be greedy, but got rice mixed with the stones. Thank you, Robin, for agreeing with us. And we are all looking forward to this very interesting session. Over to
Thank you so much.
Shangita.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Over to Shangita. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joydipta. As I said, our moderator of this evening is Professor Bashobi Fraser, who has been a founding member, patron, and the chief ideator of IPPL Kolkata. She needs no formal introduction, yet I would take this opportunity as a moment of pride to be able to say a few words about her. Professor Fraser is a poet, children's writer, editor, translator, and academic. She is Professor Emerita of English and Creative Writing and Director, Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies at Edinburgh Napier University. She is a Royal Literary Fund Fellow and an honorary fellow at the Centre for South Asian Studies at the University of Edinburgh. She has been the recipient of great many grants and awards, the chief and the most recent being that of a CBE. It is thrilling for me to note that Professor Fraser has always been declared as has also been declared as the outstanding woman of Scotland by Salter Society in 2015. She has authored and edited over 22 books and several articles, chapters, and poems in various journals, books, and anthologies. I refrain from mentioning every title due to the paucity of time you all can understand. This eminent scholar and poet is at the helm of many committees like the Scottish Pen, Poetry Association of Scotland, and Writers at Risk Committee of Scotland. She is the director on the board of the Patrick Geddes Trust and the honorary vice president of the Association of Scottish Literary Studies, just to name a few. Here in IPPL, Professor Fraser is more fondly our very own Bashobidi, a person who exudes warmth even from the other side of the screen. We thank you for joining us today, Bashobidi, and welcome you to moderate this yet another session of Indian poetry, past and present. Thank you so much for joining us today. Over to Bashobidi.
Anhita, that was a very generous introduction. Um, I just feel a bit overwhelmed right now, but I'm even more overwhelmed to be introducing this session with the renowned Indian poet, Robin Singh Angom. I have enjoyed reading your poems, and Robin has very generously agreed that I can call him Robin for this session and hereafter. So thank you for that. For your permission to do that. I have enjoyed reading your poems. They're both compelling and powerful. I like their candid nature and your ability to face the reality that confronts your homeland, your people, and the poet in you. And that, I think, is a very all that forms the essence of your poetry, which makes it so appealing. So my first question to you is, you are from Manipur. and you now live in Meghalaya. By the way, Meghalaya was, the very name was given by a geographer who was my parents' teacher, S.P. Chatterjee. And I just love it because it reminds me of Shantiniketan in a very different way, the abode of clouds and the abode of peace. And so that is your abode right now. Meghalaya has a history of rich literature and culture in India, and being somebody who is very close to Tagore's work, we know how much the history and literature of Manipur have influenced Rabindranath and other writers in India. So would you, as a Manipuri Indian poet, like to share what you most value of this historic tradition and heritage? How do you see your Manipuri roots intertwined with your Meghalaya ambience, because that is where you reside now? And finally, would you like to read a poem from your work that embodies this dual reality of your residence and your roots?
Thank you, Masubi. I think it would be difficult to single out, what I value most of my Meitei tradition and heritage. But maybe I can read a song of lament from written in Manipuri, which I have translated, rough translation. So this song perhaps encapsulates, what the Meiteis have. The Meiteis, that's the community where I come from, the Meitei community, the community that I belong to. So this song perhaps encapsulates what the Meiteis have lost in a pluralistic society, which includes Nagas, Kukis, Meitei Muslims, and other smaller communities. Apart from Meiteis. So this is the song. O Ingelei, blooming in the mountains, you fell before you could be worn. Such a loss, such a loss. Did I fall on my own? The wind was strong, hence I fell, hence I fell. I, the wind too, didn't do a thing. A blossom's life on its stalk ended, hence she fell, hence she fell. To talk about this intertwining of my Manipuri roots and the Meghalaya ambience, perhaps I can say that I felt a little maybe violently uprooted when I was packed off to study in Shillong when I was hardly 15 then. But I've also nursed romantic visions about Shillong. My elder siblings studied there, and they brought stories and pop songs of the 50s and 60s with them while I was in Manipur. And I also read about Shillong in an early Manipuri novel called Madhavi, which has a very vivid description of Shillong's famous Ward's Lake. This must have been during the Raj, and so the description, which reminded me of a constable painting. So, like I said, in one of my poems, a poem for my mother, the hills had grown on me rather quickly, but I didn't really suffer from any sense of cultural or emotional loss, really. So Um, uh, and and I don't have a poem, which embodies this dual reality, which speaks of Imphal and Shillong in the same breath. You know, someone said that my poetry perhaps lies in the distance between Imphal and Shillong, but my moving to Shillong, and I've been living in Shillong in some kind of a self-imposed exile, ever since, But it has been an absolutely enriching experience. Living away from home, from Manipur, gave me a sense of perspective. Uh, I was learning new things about the Khasis, the rich oral literature, and also seeing things that about Manipur, through the prism that that distance provided. So I'd like to read two different poems. One is about Manipur, about my childhood in Imphal. So this poem is titled "The Libran Horoscope." Somewhere among earthbound stars it slept, curled up in its parchment skin, muttering the story of the fool who will return one day to his unbelievable superstitions, and, having consulted the world, will return pursued by many fools. My horoscope slumbered, thoughtless, on my mother's heirlooms. It dozed among heady flowers, quiet in the warm darkness. Childhood took place, free from man's fears, when I had only my mother's love to protect me from knives, from fire, and death by water. I wore it like an amulet. Childhood took place among moonflowers and sunstone, in nakedness with the wind as a wet nurse. Childhood took place among fairies and were-tigers, when hills were yours to tumble down, before they housed soldiers and dreaded chambers of torture. Childhood took place when boys built fugitive fires and talked only of women, until your friend adored a gun to become a widow maker. Childhood took place before you ate from any tree and before grapes were suspended over your head. Childhood continued until a boy's wet dream became flesh by the grace of a fallen woman. My horoscope fell from innocence and lost its sleep. It came out from my mother's closet and could not remember the fragrance of roses. It changed hands with money and began suspecting many people. It is in my safekeeping now. So that's the poem about my childhood in Imphal. And this poem is titled Student. This was written with Shillong in mind when I first went there to study for further studies. Student. A matchbox cottage, one room, tin and plank wall, waxed pine floor, 5 books, one bedstead, one table, one chair, blue winter sky, and cherry blossoms, but not enough money to buy a bottle. Lonely, but it was not sadness. He had not known women. Just one pair of shoes, one hand-me-down jacket, one blue sweater his sister knitted for Shillong's winter, a faint mustache, and songs of summer wine that he brought in a tin trunk, dreams that foretold romance in these hills, but only rain kept falling on them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. I was very struck by your three different poems, and I could see the, they're poignant and powerful, and the image of the flower in it with its beauty and fragility seems to be in every poem of yours, and I think that sums up your two realities and what you went through, and your childhood poem with, and embraced by your mother's love in spite of the knives and the torture chambers, and your dreams in a tin trunk, still hold a truth for you, which is great. Overcoming the terror you have known. So my second question to you actually leads on from the first. The very first poem you read and about childhood. I can see that each poem you read so far is about a beginning, whether it's childhood, whether it's you beginning your life as a student in Shillong. But I'm sure you wrote poetry long before that. So when did you know you were a poet? And when did you know that poetry was your chosen genre? And and my final request is, could you read a poem from your earlier ones? I know you've already read a couple, but it would be great if we could have more. So when did you start writing poetry, and when did you know you were a poet?
If I may be allowed to quote from this autobiographical essay of mine, just a few sentences. Mm-hmm. I wrote my first faltering line in the relative innocence of childhood. I was about 11 or 12 years old then, and caught as I was in the flush of youth, I wanted to explore the world by writing ornate and sentimental poetry. I felt that life was ignoring me, so I thought I could engage the attention of kindred hearts through friendly and soft-hearted verse. Naturally, my poems were mostly inspired by romances and adventure stories, especially the 1001 Nights. But it was essentially, dreamy-eyed adolescent stuff. I still haven't grown out of it. And one favorite poem of mine began with these lines: "The boy stood on the burning deck." But I think I took a very long time to call myself a poet, actually, and even now I cannot be sure if I can sustain, the gift, and without meaning, without sounding, presumptuous, maybe, I can, think of. I can only think of what Neruda said in one of his poems. It was titled Poetry. The poem itself was titled Poetry. And Neruda said that poetry chose him, and it was not the other way around. He wrote, and it was at that age, poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how or when. And he says, there I was without a face, and it touched me. So I think perhaps that is what happened to me as well. And I would like, let me read this early poem of mine. It's again, it's a romantic poem, and it's also titled "To Poetry." to poetry. It was for gift of words that I went in search of you, pure, anonymous woman, with hope you will show the way to a famished mendicant and another and another drifting soul-farer. In fear, none can fill the emptiness. In fear, none can fill the emptiness that threatens to collapse into a black solitude. I inverted each fallen leaf, hoping to find you tangled in dark riverbeds or a city's impenetrable rooms, flowering in autumn boughs, away from an apostate's hand, or caught in a hunter's web and wanting to free you so that you would aim like an arrow towards my withering heart. I have walked stubbled fields of elevated earth, hoping to waylay you with nude worship once you return, homeward bound with mateless wings and pitcher around your waist, flowering among yellow mustard, with fleeting promises in your eyes of bright river clay, faceted lips, when sunlight is flung across the river. Sorry, when sunlight is flung across the shores, across the shores of a languid river. Again and again, I heard your name in the muezzin, beckoning the faithful, tremble in the early fog, lying about a lonely city. Your faraway voice dissolving as bells from rustic temples. I, who grew restless, dallying with lukewarm waters, weary of repetitive winds, I, who unearthed the meaning of woman to man, know you wait there, shimmering at the edge of all my circling dreams. Thank you.
You are definitely a poet, Robin. That was beautiful and
Thank you, Lakshmi.
evocative and moving. All the images that you brought in. Thank you. And I think you have more or less encapsulated to us what poetry means to all poets and poetry's readers. My next question is about your bilingualism as a poet. When and how do you know which language you will be writing in? Because you write in Meitei and English. Do you translate your own work? You've already read a translated poem, which we really all appreciated. So do you find this translation process a rewarding and enriching one? Could you give us an example of a poem in both your languages of expression, in Meitei and English?
Mm, uh, I began writing in Meitei Lon in Manipuri when I was growing up in Imphal. Uh, but I believe in what Jayanta Mahapatra said about the language of poetry being incidental. So because of my schooling in no, not schooling actually, yeah, schooling too in Imphal, and then when I came to Shillong, I went to St. Edmund's College. So uh, I began writing in English um, because that became the language that I became comfortable with. And so language is incidental, and I do translate my own work, but in Shillong, most of my poems, were written in English. They were birthed in English, not Manipuri so much. But what I mean to say is, if I was living in Imphal, I would have been writing only in Manipuri. So language still is I mean it's incidental. And translating, of course, translating my own work, translating the work of other Manipuri poets, of course, has been an extremely rewarding and an enriching experience. It's an ongoing process of learning, translating, because I think one cannot take even one's own native tongue for granted. So you know, uh, I go back to my language, again and again. I have a lot of many dictionaries to come to my aid, thesauruses, because language, uh, to state the obvious, is a seed which contains so many things in history, politics, culture, um, so many things. So to learn the language, even for translating, and as I mentioned, I have to relearn Manipuri. So, and I discovered so many things in the process. So it has been an extremely enriching experience, and rewarding too. So let me read this poem. Titled to Pacha. It's a Pacha is a Pacha Mitei. He is one of the finest Manipuri writers, novelist. He died at the age of 46. He was hounded as a drunkard and a madman, during his final days, and he died in extreme poverty. So to Pacha. Or before I read the English version, let me read a few lines from Manipuri.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, to give you a feel of the language. Pachada. Pacha nangi ningsing ningai oidaba misi nangi angawba namingda tharakkiba nungdung kaya amasung nangi punsida gam launa lonsin kiba thongjau kaya khalluraga nangi kupakna thakiba ningsing magi maithonggidamakta kanamatana kaptabana matik chai yungawba pachadagi angawba pacha haina khangnakiba. That's the first stanza. So to Pacha. To your uneventful death, Pacha, the stones hurled at your demented name, and the doors closed on your life. It is fitting that none mourn the face of your memory they slapped, from booze artist Pacha to lunatic Pacha. There are no more tears to shed in this withered country, where they kill pregnant women and children. Its nipples have long gone dry, and leering death walks your homeland. And why should anyone weep for your and why should anyone weep for your lonely alcoholic end? Young boys and soldiers are butchering each other by the dozen in the hills, the angry streets, day after day. And too many heroes and villains are not worth remembering at all. Death is callous, Pacha, in the land of your innocent birth. Consummate madman, unknown comrade, you were the best of all. You were the best of them all. Whether you logged the the meteorological conditions of your stricken town. Um, this is with reference to his novel, which fetched him the Sahitya Academy Award. It's titled. It's got a very interesting prosaic title, Imphal and its meteorological conditions. That's the title of the novel. So, whether you log the meteorological conditions of your stricken town, pen dipped in your drunken blood, or portrayed old men hard of hearing, breaking heart of roots, savage lover no woman would tame, existential hero and fiercely proud pauper. You laughed yourself insane in the teeth of the gathering storm. Hovel dweller amidst concrete and iron, anachronistic mendicant, an embracer of manuscripts in pounding rain, angry star which burn in our skies, what were your dreams? Reveal them a little for me, anonymous brother. Poetry in your homeland must die a natural death, when one must sew up his lips and clog his ears with mud. And to be a man, first of all, you must sell yourself to the highest bidder. Immaculate madling with resplendent dreams, you refuse to sell them in your land where villains strut as the pure in streets. You only said, one's homeland is dear. I have not seen all of this land. I have not even I have not been able to tread the grass that grows there. For a long time, the tramps and lunatics beckoned you, and only they shall honor your name. Thank you.
That's a very wonderful tribute to a great writer. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Would you say that your poetry has evolved with your earlier work being romantic, which, as you mentioned earlier, and imbued with images from local mythology? And I wondered if you could read two poems which reflect this romantic phase, which also looks at Manipuri mythology. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking for myself, I think evolution may not be, the right word, but I think I have been a bit of a shape shifter. I began with romantic poems, and I also mentioned that I still haven't grown out of it. But I also talked about the agonizing political situation in Manipur and in the Northeast. So I've been called an overtly political poet, but which is not actually true. And like many other poets, I think I'm quite a dodgy, animal, and maybe poets cannot be typecast as a political poet or a love poet. We keep changing stances. I like this image of Keats's, the chameleon poet, in the image. So I have tried to do many different things in my poetry. I try to mix love and politics. Again, something that I try to learn from Neruda, who cast a very long shadow on my poetry. Perhaps I can read you. You said you asked me about a poem which may be imbued with images from local mythology. So maybe I'll read something about about a poem based on Khasi legend, not something from Manipur. So these are two short poems written in the Chinese mode, and these poems use a popular Khasi story of star-crossed lovers. Bhupen Hazarika, our icon from the Northeast, made a film on it. So here's the background of this poem. U Manik Raitong, which translated as Manik Raitong, the wretched one. So U Manik Raitong, an orphaned youth, had an illicit affair with the king's wife. The king is known as the Siim in Khasi. So when the affair came to light, the king's council decreed U Manik Raitong's death. An accomplished musician, he played the flute, so an accomplished musician, U Raitong planted his bamboo flute in the earth before his immolation, and it is believed that the bamboo, flute took root, So a poem divided in two parts, two short poems actually, written in the Chinese mode. The first part is titled "At the End of Autumn, Sitting Near the Window." So in this poem, what I've tried to do is, it is believed that Manik Raitong, the wretched one, is an orphan youth. He was he lived alone. I mean, he didn't have any friends. But in the poem, I have put myself, imagined, of course, as his friend, his only friend and confidant. So. I mean, so this is me speaking, actually. I mean, his friend and confidant, So, at the end of autumn, sitting near the window. It is the 9th moon, and already a shiver runs down the back of the hill. In calm solitude, I latched my door, wondering if I'll ever see plum blossoms again. Blinking among pines, the autumn stars, silk spun moonlight and silver stream breaking over stones. Laden peasants from day's end. Laden peasants from day's end, bringing winterwood to the Siem's mansion, the king's Siem's mansion. How sad is the lot of my friend Manik, spilling his heart from the 7 mouths of his flute, even though he has dared to wear the flower of the Siem. This is a idiomatic expression, if you wearing the flower of someone else, another man is having some kind of an affair, is having a relationship with a man's wife, an adulterous relationship. So. The second part is titled "Spring at Ribhoi." Ribhoi is the area, is the neighborhood where Manik Raitong lived, or it would be the what would be kingdom in a sense, not just a small neighborhood, Spring at Ribhoi. Winter withdraws quietly from the Ribhoi hill. Like white reeds to deck the late year's coffin, peach blossoms fall in spring wind. Swept clean by spring wind, the hills, fog melting from the nestling hamlet, and green are the pines skirting it. Laughing children on their way to meadows, men and women with plows before the industrious season. Because life falls as petals and death comes when least expected. None remembers the passing of Manik Raitong and how he planted his bamboo flute for earth to play music again in spring. But cold, cold is the seam's heart, and spring has not visited his garden.
I think in those two poems you have immortalized Manik Raitong, and I'm glad you remain a romantic, Robin, because it shows your faith in life, in nature, in spite of everything, in spite of the tragedy of, that meets love, a homeland, a people. So long may the romantic in you live. Those are, again, very moving poems. Is there anything else you would like to read from this phase before I move to my next question?
Uh, I have old poems, of course, but uh, maybe I can read them later. So please ask me the next question.
Okay, yeah. And we are here to listen to you. So if you want to stop me and read a poem, please do, because that's what we would love and welcome. So
Thank you.
Manipur, you're welcome. Manipur is always thought of alongside, as we all know, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Sikkim, and Tripura. Would you say that poetry from the Northeast in India has a particular flavor which makes it distinctive? Would you say this is thematic? Is this largely due to the history? Is it because of the terrain itself? Is it because of its culture and heritage? So finally, after you have looked at why it is distinctive, first of all, is it distinctive? Secondly, why do you think it's distinctive? And then read a poem with your regional affiliation, which mirrors your regional affiliation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Again, if you bear with me, I'd like to quote from a little essay that I wrote earlier. It's titled Alternative Poetry of the Northeast, where I talk about these distinguishing characteristics of Northeast poetry written in English. So just a few sentences. What are the distinguishing traits of Northeast poetry written in English? I asked this question. It is the native world, most of all, which comes into view in the work of these poets who write in English. A predilection for images and motifs drawn from nature is proof that Northeast poetry in English is deeply rooted in the land. Nature, within quotes, is not an impassive witness, to the existential despair of men and women, as in the contemporary wasteland of modernist poets, but a living presence for the Northeast poets, where hills and rivers are also deities. Everything has life: rocks, stones, trees, rivers, hills, and all life is sacred, says Mamangdai. And the fates of natives are, inevitably intertwined with them. And thus, in spite of the trappings of modernity, the life of most communities of the Northeast is defined by their folk origins. The mythic world still survives at the frontiers of the civilized world. And again, to use Mamang Dai's words, the folk still continues to assume the intensity of reality for many. Um, so Mamang Dai, draws from this, from her own, roots, of course, from this folk world, from the myths that she grew up with, and it's and there's so many of amongst us, Mamang Dai, Kanfam Singh Nongkanri, Desmond Karmaflang, from and Esther Siem from Meghalaya, and others, of course, from other states as well. So myths provide a key to the cultural behavior of a people, but when communities seem to be losing their way in the midst of cultural colonization, mythopoeic poets, out of a deep-seated desire, step in and try to emulate the traditional storytellers and shamans by recalling the lore of the tribe. Khasis, I talked about Khasis. They have a very rich oral, literature and and wonderful stories, which my friend Kanfam Singh Nongkanri has retold, as it were. I mean, and brought out the stories in a collection titled "Around the Hearth." It was published by Penguin, and so aspects of Kanfam Singh Nongkanri's poetry, his spontaneous gift, for wit and humor, for example, is perhaps a quality that he inherited from a native tradition, from tradition of Khasis, called Pawar, which also points to the folk world and ethnopoetics, which is a non-Western, de-centered poetics of indigenous people. I'm thinking of Mumbai, as the center of English poetry, of Indian poetry in English. So, and also the chronicling of contemporary events, the fallout of violence, above all, is another important aspect of Northeast poetry in English. And this has led to the accusation that some Northeast poetry, some Northeast poets are unduly obsessed with the poetry of politics and brutality. But to be a tenacious, witness to the agonizing and recurrent, political violence, without, sensationalizing it, is also a risk that the Northeast poet has to undertake often. So the poetry that they write, when it's about politics or history, is not a poetry of unquestioning nationalism, again, within quotes, in the face of a fear of loss of identity, and encroachment of territory and cultural values, but a nervous internalization of the increasingly complex politics of the region. And another interesting and very important, crucial, feature of Northeast poetry in English is this phenomenon of displacement, which poets Nabanita Kanungo and Navina Das and others have written about. It's a compelling motif in the corpus of Northeast poetry in English. So these poets, Nabanita Kanungo especially, have made attempts to, salvage deeply traumatic remembrances, memories from a third generation's perspective, and Displacement. When I talk about displacement, I have the partisan in mind, and people who have been displaced from East Pakistan and who have been made to or allowed to settle in Shillong and in other parts of the Northeast. So the attempts to salvage deeply traumatic remembrances from a third generation's perspective seem to indicate that displacement, uh, unfortunately, leads to never-ending displacement, and histories, refugees would find themselves homeless after the first uprooting. So these are some of the aspects of features of Northeast poetry in English that I can think about. But of course, we have many poets, writing about different subjects and different themes. So it would be, again, it would not be defensible to talk about a tradition. Although I have this rather ambitious title, Alternative Poetry of the Northeast, but to talk in terms of a tradition may not be defensible. So let me read a poem titled from the Book of Grievances. It's a little long. Please bear with me. From the Book of Grievances. From here, day weeps in the failing light, and the evenings are misty-eyed. The eaves drip pastoral dew. Dark green are leaves of June, hung on the clothesline of rain. The hills remain impassive, with an old reputation of silence, and none knows about our dreams, muffled now as if by blaring progress, put to shame before ornate streets. In the evenings, proud hearts that have learnt to die well return in the bronze dusk, but something has been buried, something akin to hope and dreams. Our souls shall not speak, not an indignant word shall escape our lips, and if they cannot hear the silent moan of our hearts, we will not implore pity. Implacable death came upon us, and the finest memories are of no worth. Proud ancestral names, faithful women with raven hair, the heroic struggles of our small lives. What are tradition and our history, but only death with a long memory? For how long shall we make our forefathers walk as spirits? Today, with grief sitting on our hearts, we will sing of clouds that do not come home. We will sing the songs of those Banniston mountains. We will drink deep from bamboo mugs and wipe remembrance from our lips. From a trajectory of dark deeds, our days fly towards destinations in uncharted galaxies of time. Broken skylines clutch the hills, bringing a momentary fear of the earth shaker who turns violently in his sleep. As we saunter along overgrown trails, the hill's night sang to us, but concealed its myths of famine and pestilence. A party of egrets followed us in the fog one January morning. When we entered the fog's body, we again entered our history. leaving all milestones behind. India's native villages, beneath the bamboo and watching hills, seated on mats of clouds, we could see the glint of paddy fields, gripped by rain and mist. Once we sprinkled mutual libations to create these jade and emerald fields. My love, something I cannot name, seems to be ashamed of our dances. Even as we hide our roots like gnarled limbs, we begin to disown what we cherish: fidelity, openness, daring. We must learn quickly before the devious ones mutilate our names carved on monoliths. Time ran out in Oinam, in Ukrul. These are places in Manipur where, the atrocities, the human rights violations took place. So time ran out in Oinam, in Ukrul, when they who gave us a republic brought reconcentrados, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, reconcentrados from the Americas, watched impassively the smoking fields, prodded with clubs the bruised vagina, the shocked testis. We became impotent in the face of mortification. Today, we will bury tradition's fetus. We will not weave unique history where there was no homespun yarn. We, the worthy henchmen of tyranny, will embrace the villain's principles. We will desert honor in the vain hope for peace will burn our hills. When we scream and our throats rasp, we will spit wanton civilization in the eye. As east meets west and the hills crack, blind Venus roots grope under earth, we turn our own perpetrator, victims of our own dark deeds. It is all very fine, long sacrificing brother of the night. Your state-of-the-art rifle commands awe. But when you procure your ignominious arsenal, can you smother the sibilant whispers in the valley and the hills? Can you answer the cries of children and widows? You singe the flower of youth with a pious lamp in your veins, but our homes have been herded away, for our fields to lie fallow, and our young and old spread maimed hands for the intractable belly, the naked skin. Thank you.
That actually leaves me quite speechless. I mean, that's far from sensational. It's honest, it's truthful, and that's what poetry does. It defends human rights. So thank you, Robin, for that. You spoke about, Northeastern poetry being decentered. I really like that ethnopoetic explanation. You talk about displacement, and this displacement can be really distressing when you feel displaced in your own land, sense of homelessness, yeah. And I think you're right to call it alternate poetry. For those who live through violence meted out to a whole land and people, it is impossible not to feel for what one holds dear. One's land and people, what else is there, of relationships? So to say that poetry should not be political is to shy away from the truth and to silence the violence that one meets with every day. So I love your, you have one, well, there are many lines I love, and one is the uncharted galaxies of time, and that is what you're doing. You're actually charting them. So thank you through your poetry. You have said that Northeastern poets are often misunderstood. Could you say why this is so? Would you like to read one poem of yours which has been misunderstood and share with this audience how you would like this poem to be read and interpreted? So set us right, Robin.
No, of course, I cannot accuse, everyone of of having, misunderstood some of my poems. But this poem, "Native Land," let me read the poem first, then maybe I can talk a little about it in detail. Native Land. First came the scream of the dying in a bad dream, then the radio report and a newspaper. 6 shot dead, 25 houses razed, 16 beheaded with hands tied behind their backs inside a church. As the days crumbled and the victors and their victims grew in number, I hardened inside my thickening hide until I lost my tenuous humanity. I ceased thinking about abandoned children inside blazing huts, still waiting for their parents. If they remembered their grandmother's tales of many winter hurts at the hour of sleeping death, I didn't want to know. If they ever learnt the magic of letters. And the women, heavy with seed, their soft bodies mown down like grain stalk during their lyric harvest. If there were wildflowers in their hair while they waited for their men, I didn't care anymore. I burnt my truth with them and buried uneasy manhood with them. I didn't mutter on some far off day. There are limits. But when the days absolved the butchers, I continue to live as if nothing happened. So this poem, as I mentioned, maybe was read from a very limited, perspective by some, even friends of mine, and they correctly identified the event. It has to do with ethnic classes and the communities involved. But this poem is not merely about ethnic cleansing, and I had hoped that the poem will contain a few universal truths about the cycle of brutality, the retaliatory violence, just as in, I was reminded of Neruda's poem. I'm explaining a few things, where again, let me quote a few lines from Neruda. He says, written in the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War. Maybe he had the bombing of Guernica in mind. So Neruda writes, Spain emerges, and from every dead child a rifle with eyes, and from every crime bullets are born, which will one day find the bull's eye of your hearts. So it's this this unending, the spiraling, unending, the cycle of brutality and the retaliatory violence, which is universal truth, and that I have tried to, portray or talk about in this poem. It's not confined to, to one particular event, and also the universal fact or the universal truth that women and children are the foremost targets of such brutality. And So, uh, you know, when you write about, when poets from the North write about politics, about history, you know, people, and you know, I hope I'm not wrong, you know, tend to look at things, you know, look at the entire Northeast as a hotbed of secessionism, you know, and you know, so. But as I mentioned, it's not a poetry of unquestioning nationalism, and for the poet, you know, when you talk about the poetry of conflict, you know, conflict can happen at different levels. It's not the over familiar friction between the center and the margin, but the conflict for the poet, for the writer, can you know, occurs at much you know, deeper levels. Conflict with for the poet, someone like myself, the conflict would be also between my people, my history, my society, and finally also a conflict with myself, you know, because as I mentioned, you know, poets keep on changing their stances. Poets are slippery people, slippery animals, you know. So I may be writing about something today, something else today, and you know, tomorrow I might change. I may be writing about something completely different, you know. And also when poets from the Northeast write about nature, I talked about this, you know, this predilection of images and motifs drawn from nature, the native world coming into view in their poetry. You know, people tend to read these poems, you know, about nature in a rather simplistic kind of way, you know, and or look at it, compare it with maybe uh, with a sublime in a romantic sense, you know, that encounter of the emotional and the natural world. But as I mentioned, you know, poets such as Mamang Dai and Desmond Flang and Kanfam Singh Nomkanri and Esther Same, you know, when they write about the mythic world, the mythic world still exists at the frontiers of the civilized world, and so it's not just about, you know, this emotional and I mean connect. I mean the meeting of the emotional and the natural world. So perhaps that's what I meant, you know, when I said my poems have been um, interpreted in a very limited sense, you know, and I feel that perhaps, uh, and this is not just true of others, but for myself as well. And if I have to read poetry from other languages and other communities, poetry from the other parts of the world, I have to engage with their history, with their politics. You know, the context is would be very important. You know, but there may be, unfortunately, uh, a refusal on the part of readers from many parts of the country to engage with history and the politics of the Northeast. So they may distort the meanings of some of our poems. You know, they may misread or may have a very limited understanding of what we are trying to write about. You know. I don't know if I have answered, you know.
No, no, you have actually, Robin. I mean, you have shown that how conflict operates in various layers within a poet, and you have also your poetry and the poem you read about, if you don't mind me saying, about a massacre which we should never forget. I mean, lest we forget. And your line, "I burnt my truth with them, those who did die in those flames." I think what you have done is shown how the richness of poetry is in its multiple meaning meanings that can be deciphered from the reading of any one word, any one line in a poem. And that is its richness. So we really need to delve in beneath the line and decipher the various meanings that the poet wishes to convey, rather than withhold. Okay, so I think that's a very good answer. And this leads to my next question. Considering the recent history of conflict and the suffering that this has entailed for your region and your people, would you say that this experience compels poets and other writers? You know, you've been referring to novelists from your region. Writers today to bear witness to the events that they have seen unfolding. Is this inevitable for poets? You've been reading from Neruda. Neruda never shies away from the truth. Poets who are dedicated to voicing the truth as they see it in their work. So do poets bear witness through their work? And could you read a poem that bears witness to the trauma that you have witnessed?
I think it may have to do with subjective realities, actually, you know, because when we're talking about violence and brutality, I mentioned that Mamang Dai writes a completely different kind of poetry. She doesn't talk so much about. I can't remember any poem that she has written about the political, the brutality that I often talk about in my poems. So it has to do with subjective realities. But with many poets from Manipur, for instance, you know, in fact, a friend of mine, a Manipuri poet, once told me that they have been honing. He used the word honing the poetry of survival with guns pressed against both your temples, you know. And he calls it the gun of the state and the gun of the non-state actors, you know, the so-called revolutionaries. You know. So maybe it has to do with here and now, and you know, and maybe, you know, like Neruda, we couldn't, you know, many of them, including myself, couldn't shy away from those things. We couldn't close our eyes to the brutal things that are happening all around us. We can close our ears, and we had to respond. You know. Maybe. I have a poem titled Everywhere I Go. Everywhere I go, I carry my homeland with me. I look for it in protest marches on the streets of the capital, in dark-maned girls of beauty contests, forced to waiting now behind windows. I harbor the wretchedness of those youths who do not wish to return, but would rather serve in a city's sordid restaurants because devils and thieves rule their home. I often hear about it. I often hear about its future in conflict resolution symposiums, where professors and retired generals analyze the fate of my people and their misery. But I can see it returning with women and water in rural evenings. And I want to tell my poet friends of the 12 mothers who stripped themselves and asked soldiers to rape them. In fact, I make imaginary journeys to its little world every day and wait for the fog of justice to lift for a murdered 8-year-old girl. Those who speak the language of progress call my homeland a mendicant state, not knowing its landlocked misery, its odd splendor, and no one knows who picks up its bodies. I know I must stop agonizing. Perhaps I am the only one who broods about his land. Even if people say suffering must reach new heights for a new beginning. But whenever I touch my homeland's streets, everyone seems happy and have no grouses. I must stop agonizing or save what I can, such as the tunes of my homeland, which dance in my blood. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Robin. Thank you. Um, I wonder if you don't want to go on with this topic, we will understand. But your poetry has been described as poetry in the time of terror. As a poet who is not a mere chronicler of events, but an artist who sees into the life of things, and that's what I meant by the multiple meanings within your lines and the words you use, but an artist who sees into the life of things and voices the dignity of a people whose personal and national tragedies have not crushed them yet. Could you say what this has meant for you as a creative writer to retain the power of the word, because your words are powerful, which has given you the strength to continue writing? So could you tell us something that will inspire us as well, all of us, to continue to believe in the power of words and to continue writing in a sustained way without crumpling?
Thank you, Basmi, for asking me this. I, lately I've been thinking a lot about Auden, Auden talking about eros and agape. So, without crumpling, and not to give into despair. I was thinking about, although I know that a writer cannot do it overtly. But I was thinking about compassion. Of course, it should come naturally. Compassion, from I think, if I'm not mistaken, I read that it comes from the word compassio, which means to suffer with. So I was, I have a few, 3 short poems, and
Yeah, please read them.
Yeah, the first poem is titled "Understanding," and in this poem I have in mind, if you remember the Syrian boy who was drowned, Aylan Kurdi. And he's the picture of the drowned boy, being washed up, by the sea, to the beach. It became viral. Aylan Kurdi. When did this happen? Some years ago. So this poem is a reaction to that picture actually, which became viral. And this poem is titled Understanding. I can understand on this virtual day, even without smelling, let alone touching it. So I will not say a word about the sea giving up a toddler. I can even understand this groundswell of pity, as if humanity was testing the waters of feeling. After adapting a short brackish tragedy, despite pleas from the gentlest mourner not to use the image of drowning, but only remember a child's smile. In fact, the boy's grandmother, this toddler's grandmother, when she saw, this picture of the boy, the drowned boy, herself, on social media, which became viral. I think she also posted photographs of the boy's, happier days, and the boy laughing and smiling. So she pleaded, pleaded that we should. That's what I tried to say in this poem. Despite pleas from the gentlest mourner, not to use the image of drowning, but only remember a child's smile. In an age whose only metaphysical worry is what can be saved, trees, animals, or children, for instance, late after the mocking ecstatic destruction, within quotes, these are, of course, Yeats's words. So that is one poem titled Understanding. This other short poem is titled October, and this has to do with the Rohingya crisis, Rohingya crisis, and again I saw and I of course read and saw images of the Rohingyas, the exodus, the forced exodus, and the Rohingyas trying to cross the Naf River, which separates Myanmar from Bangladesh. So this poem is titled October. We are waiting inside houses of cloud-catching mountains for the resolute flutes of rain to stop. Herded all along the highway in slime, a last wave of leaves displaced by a regime. Through perforated awnings of October trees, jostle to cross a wide transmigratory river, memory-laden leaf boats. Something made us lonelier. We let too many immigrants into our hearts. Disproportionate future left us speechless. And this another short poem, of course. This has to do with the pandemic. It's titled Forgetting. Forgetting. When we became forgetful, we cannot remember what gives us pause on days which seem to never end. To forget is to die once more. Through Moses' Egypt to the Wuhan spectacle, creatures, animate or not, still journey on bravely, slighting borders. Coal, dazed refugees, torpedoes, mountain goats. Even as pestilence brokers have begun roaring, the economy is dead. Long live the economy. We notice streets bereft of children, luxury yachts for the first time, while a goods train leisurely flattens a curve of migrant workers and snow-crowned peaks swim into view daily on grimy streets. We cannot mask an ineffable fear, unlike emperor penguins marching in a dignified line toward extinction. Thank you.
Gosh, that was powerful. All, you know, with beginning with the little Syrian boy and the Rohingyas in leaf boats, and then the penguins marching to extinction. And as you say, we cannot mask our fear. So thank you, Robin. This brings me to my final question. What is your dream for Manipur and the whole of the Northeast? And I wondered if this too could be expressed in a poem. I'm glad you mentioned the necessity for compassion, feeling sympathy with, which is not pity, which is something that Tagore and Gandhi, whom we still look to as our nation builders, who really spoke of compassion and love and truth as central to human survival and social justice. So thanks for mentioning that. So what is your dream for Manipur and the Northeast? And what is your message as a poet? Do you have something for us?
I have a poem. I don't know whether it's adequate or whether it's apt. But let me read it anyway. It's titled, "You Know It Well, My Homeland." You know it well, my homeland. I have no other. I have been traveling through half-lit territories without you, stopping neither here nor there. I am too uncertain a man to be a citizen of the globe. For too long have I been made to feel a welcome non-citizen in a city which has finally auctioned its soul. But how many faces can I carry for checkpoints? Now, I only want a name with a befitting face that points to my place of birth. Stop poisoning your rivers so that I can return to drink their sweetness. Stop dropping death on sleeping men so that I can sleep fitfully in my boyhood's bed. Do not make it easy for us to turn into brutes, but resurrect your condemned lovers so that we can make an about turn before that never-ending drop into savagery. It's a pity that your poetry has to be summoned as a witness to murder, has to spill as the blood of naked evidence, has to write only about tears. Thank you.
And may that message and dream come true. Thank you, Robin, very
Thank you.
much for your wonderful poetry, evocative, truthful, and moving. There are there are a few comments and questions, so I'll go to them and read them from the chat box. But before I read from them, can I just say that I want to quote you, you know, and the writers you have been quoting. We all agree that poetry, as you have convinced us, is about subjective realities which we cannot escape. And I think what you are so right in saying, what poetry, what poets do is they hone the poetry of survival. So poetry will survive all violence, and suffering can only make it greater, I guess. So one of the questions is from Amit Shah. Exile is often seen as providing impetus for creative output. Is this the same for you? You did talk about your self-imposed exile in Shillong.
Yes. I yeah, to a great extent, yes. It gives me a sense of perspective. Uh, you know, which made me able to see things. Maybe get rid of my prejudices, for example, through the prism of distance. And when I came into contact with different communities, I mentioned the Khasis, and of course, Shillong is a is very metropolitan. I mean, cosmopolitan. Sorry, cosmopolitan, and so many communities here. So exile has been, of course, uh, very enriching and rewarding, although it can be painful at times. So yes,
Comments on how everybody has agreed that your poetry is wonderful. I mean, that's the one word that comes across again and again. And on Facebook, a listener, Pradipta De Sharkar, has asked if you could focus on your the poem "The Strange Affair."
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. It's a longest poem, autobiographical poem, where I make an imaginary journey again from Shillong to Imphal, passing through uh, three different states, um, and that would be Meghalaya, Assam, Nagaland, to reach Manipur. And I have maybe I mean I try to do too many things in that poem, and um, I I talk not just about myself, but about again but mostly about the agonizing political situation in Manipur and the Northeast as a whole. And but I again, the what I mentioned about conflict, the poets conflict with different different layers, of conflict. I think all those things can be found in this poem. Um, and um, mm, when usually, I think again, many people jump to the conclusion that Northeasterners, the so-called the indigenous people, would be would be secessionists, and but as I mentioned, for writers, for poets, it'll not be, it can never be unquestioning nationalism. Of course, we all, you know, identify or love our homelands, but we also could start questioning things about things which may not seem right to many of us. We talk about. I don't want to enter into, controversial or politics here, but uh, we talk about racism, and of course, many Northeasterners have been the targets of racist attacks in cities. But racism is innate in us, in all of us. So racism exists in the Northeast too. We either look up or look down. I mean, that's how I look. I mean, I see things. We either look up or look down on people, or we look up to people or we look down on people. So it's something innate in us, and we can't do it. So all those things, I have indirectly, I have touched upon those things in my poems. So it's not unquestioning nationalism. So I have been critical about things that don't seem right to me, happening in my the things happening in my own land, in my own homeland. And I like to look upon myself as some kind of witness in this poem that someone mentioned, the strange affair of Robin S. Ngango.
Thank you, Robin. I think you have answered Pradita's question very well. Joydeep has a question. How do you look at Joyanta Mahapatra's role as a poet and editor in your formative years as a poet?
That's a absolutely relevant question, because I owe him a world of thanks. He he gave me my first break, and he published my poem in the first ever poetry page of the Telegraph Color magazine, which he edited. And he has been a guiding light for, he has been the guiding light for many of us in the Northeast, for many poets in the Northeast, apart from publishing our work in Chandrabhaga, so. I have I hope I might be holding you up, I have a small poem that I have written about him. I thought of reading that, but.
Please read it, yes.
But I cannot actually kept it aside, so it might take a little time for me to locate it. I'm sorry, I can't seem to find it. Because I didn't think that I would get a chance to read that poem. Afraid I will have to leave it at that, because I can't seem to find it.
Maybe, Robin, you can post it to us, to Nishya Shanghita.
Yes,
both of them, Amit, and what we'll do is we can put it in our WhatsApp group, but also post it on our Facebook page.
Okay.
So it'll be a global, it'll have a global presence.
Oh, thank you.
I look forward to that. I think we'll come to our final question, because we have overstepped the time, and it's been such an enriching session. So if this is okay, we'll end with Manali Chaudhary's question. She first says that she's written a paper on your work, which is with the publisher, and she's really moved by your evocative words. In her paper, she has explored the idea of space in your writings. So her question is, how do you view the loss of personal as well as public space as a part and parcel of the Northeast experience as a whole? So I think you have to go back to questions that we have been exploring through this session. I will appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes. Space. We were talking about displacement, of course, and space. I mean, I think for a writer, of course, it's something that he or she has to create and guard fiercely. Otherwise, we cannot function. We cannot survive without that space. But it is also, I think, becoming increasingly difficult to find that space, and to find it. I call it home also. So homelessness is not just for displaced people, but for myself as well. Homelessness is not just an imaginary fear. Where is home? Where do you find that space? So I have often wrestled with it, and because any home that you have, you feel that you belong to, even the original home where you have come from, or the home that you have built for yourself in another place, can can be alienating. You know, can be disappointing, can be alienating, and that can happen when you cannot find that space, when it doesn't fit in with your, I think, into your into your uh, into your beliefs, you know. So that has happened to me, and someone, as I said, someone mentioned that my poetry lies in the distance between Shillong and Imphal. So I'm not, neither here nor there. I've gone somewhere in between, because if I can be candid about it, there are things that I love about Imphal. There are things that I hate about Imphal, and the same it would be true of Shillong too. So it's difficult to find that space, and if I don't know what space the questioner has actually in mind, but that is how I would look at it.
I think what you have said earlier is everywhere you go, you carry your homeland with you. And so it has never left you. And I think I feel the same. I mean, India has never left me. And this whole question about where you belong is not just how you feel, is how others feel about you. And what we are facing, which you have expressed so meaningfully right through this session, what we are facing in this world today is the crisis of citizenship. And I think that is a poignant question for all of us. We can feel we belong, but will we be accepted? How are we seen by society? So that's one thing. I have somebody, people have started thanking you and saying, as we come to the end of the session, can I just say how wonderfully enriching it has been for me, Robin, to chair this session. Thank you, Joydeep, for letting me moderate it. I should also say not chairing, but moderating, because the IPPL is the chair. And IPPL for enabling us to listen to such great voices from India and the world. Thank you, Shanghita and Nishi and Amit and everyone. And we're missing Shangjukta, but she's never far away. She is with us. Has this session been recorded? So
yes,
that
yes.
that's brilliant. So those of you who know some of your friends wanted to sit in and listen, do tell them that they can listen to it in their own time. One more, I just want to say that, Robin, I look forward to more of your work. I will be reading your work. I know that you started off ages ago in 1988 with Words and the Silence, Time's Crossroads, 2006, The Desire for Roots, which comes across in your poetry. I'll end with this marvelous session, which has been fascinating, wonderful, enriching, and enlightening, with a little quotation from one of your own poems, A Sleepless Night. A sleepless night, a love-lorn night, and poetry arrived silent to console my wounded being. Your poetry has consoled us. If I may say, from Edinburgh this afternoon, this evening in India. Thank you very much
for your heartwarming words, and it has been an absolutely enriching experience for me too, for the wonderful, very insightful questions, which I warmed up to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Bashwedi. I think the way you conducted, I mean, the entire session was conducted, and the way, Bashwedi, you have concluded the final part, there is nothing more to say, even to wind it up. I can only say that, as a matter of formality, a session needs to be ended with a vote of thanks. And I would simply invite Navonita Di to give the vote of thanks. And that would be the end of the session this evening. Navonita Di.
Thank you, Shanghita. It has been a wonderful session, and we have had a very enriching experience listening to Robin Nangham, and so brilliantly moderated by Professor Bashabi Fraser or Bashabi D. And the poems that you read, it was so enriching, and they struck a chord. Each of them, they struck a chord with the audience, and you brought in such a diverse, uh, so much of diversity through your poems, talking about the politics, the brutalities, at the same time bringing out the beauty of the place that Meghalaya is, and it's each of them must have been an experience. Thank you so much uh, for coming to IPPL. Of course, it's an platform, but you brought out so much diversity in the conversation. Thank you, Dr. Joydeep Sharanga, Joydeep Da, and Shanghita for coordinating this extraordinary session. And thanks a lot to our secretary, Dr. Nishi Pulugurtha. Nishidi has been very dynamic in her tenure as secretary of IPPL, and we have been having such wonderful events in spite of the pandemic. We are really thankful to you. A special thanks for Dr. Amit Shankar Shaha. He is himself a poet of renown. And a special thanks to him for designing all such brilliant posters. All the event posters of IPPL are designed by Amit. We are fortunate today to have Professor Jharna Shanyal and Sri Amalesh Dashgupta with us as audience, and IPPL extends thanks to them as well for their presence today. No event can be successful without the audience, and we are extremely grateful to all those who have tuned in to listen to today's conversation, both in Zoom and from Facebook, from the IPPL page of Facebook. And we look forward to seeing more of you in all our future events. With this note, let's end this evening with the hope that IPPL will continue with its tradition of bringing poetry, as Bashabidi said, bringing poetry to the heart of the nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Robin. Take care.
Thank you, Navonita Di. Thank you, Robin sir. Thank you.